The grand hall of varieties was not a place built for mercy. Its vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadows so thick they seemed to possess weight, pressing down upon all who dared gather beneath them. Blood-red torches lined the obsidian walls, their flames dancing with unnatural stillness, casting light that did not comfort but rather illuminated the depths of what lurked in every corner. This was a place where fortunes were made on the backs of the desperate, where lives were bartered like grain, and where the powerful came to display their wealth by purchasing what no moral world should ever sell. Tonight, the hall trembled with a different energy, something raw and primal that made even the most hardened slave traders shift uncomfortably in their embroidered seats. The auction had proceeded smoothly for hours. Elven servants with silver tongues, dwarvish blacksmiths whose hammers could forge starlight into steel, rare beasts from the crimson jungles of Thessera, even a captured storm elemental bottled in crystalline chains. Each had been presented, bid upon, and sold to the highest offer with the cold efficiency of commerce that had long ago abandoned its conscience. But now, as the midnight bell tolled its deep and resonant warning, the atmosphere changed. The auctioneer, a tall, angular creature whose species was deliberately ambiguous, wrapped in robes that seemed woven from liquid midnight, raised one elongated hand. Silence fell like an executioner's blade. Even the torches seemed to dim as if the fire itself sensed what was coming. Esteemed patrons, the auctioneer's voice slithered through the hall, each word carefully measured. We now present our final offering of the evening. A creature of legend. A monster of myth. A prize beyond price, or perhaps beyond foolishness to claim. The massive iron doors at the far end of the hall groaned open, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that breath became visible mist. Guards entered first, 12 of them each clad in blessed armor etched with protective runes, each gripping silver-tipped spears with hands that trembled despite their training. They formed a corridor of terrified steel, and through that corridor she was led. The wild vampire woman of the northern wastes. Chains of iron, thick as a man's wrist, bound her wrists and ankles. More chains wrapped around her torso, crossing over the tattered silk dress that clung to her frame. Once elegant, now reduced to strips of fabric that spoke of violence and captivity. Each link of those chains had been inscribed with holy script from a dozen different faiths, blessed by priests who had demanded triple payment and refused to look at what they were binding. Yet despite the restraints, despite the obvious attempts to break her spirit, she walked with the bearing of a queen being escorted to her throne rather than a slave being paraded for sale. Her hair was wild, long and black as a starless night, cascading in untamed waves past her shoulders, some strands matted with old blood, others floating as if moved by a wind only she could feel. Her skin was pale beyond mortal paleness, the color of marble statues in moonlight, marked here and there with scars that spoke of battles won and losses survived. These were not the neat scars of surgical precision but jagged testimonies of claws, blades, and fire that had tried and failed to end her. But it was her eyes that commanded the room. Crimson, not the red of rubies or roses, but the red of fresh blood catching firelight. They glowed with an inner luminescence, scanning the assembled crowd not with the resignation of the defeated but with the cold calculation of a predator assessing which throat to tear first. Her gaze was feral, intelligent, and utterly unbroken. It promised violence. It promised death. It promised that any who dared claim her would pay a price measured in screams. When her lips parted slightly, whether in a sneer or simply to taste the fear-thick air, her fangs became visible. Not the decorative, romanticized points of vampire folklore, but genuine instruments of predation, sharp, slightly curved, designed by evolution or curse to pierce flesh and find the pulsing highway of life beneath. And then there were her wings. They unfurled partially as she was led onto the raised platform. The guards had tried to bind them, but even restrained, they commanded awe. Large and powerful, the wingspan easily 15 feet when fully extended, they were not the feathered wings of angels but membranous structures like those of ancient dragons, dark as shadow-given form, traced with veins that pulsed with dim crimson light. They spoke of a time when she had owned the night sky, when she had been apex rather than commodity. The platform creaked under her weight, not from mass but from the sheer presence she brought with her, as if reality itself bent slightly in acknowledgement of what she was. The crowd reacted as one might expect. Nobles from a dozen different worlds and species, sleek Xanthians with their crystalline skin, Gormith warlords whose honor was measured in conquest, Elysian merchants whose wealth could purchase continents, all of them leaned back in their seats. Some covered their mouths. Others gripped the arms of their chairs. A few made warding gestures, religious symbols traced in the air with shaking fingers. No one bid. The auctioneer, practiced in the art of selling the unsellable, began his pitch with the smooth confidence of his profession. Gentle beings, before you stands a specimen without equal. Captured in the Wraithwood after a hunt that cost 17 lives, this vampire possesses strength equivalent to 50 normal beings, speed that makes her a blur to unenhanced vision, and regenerative capabilities that make her nearly immortal. Imagine the possibilities: a warrior who cannot fall, a guardian who requires no sleep. She killed 3 handlers on the journey here, someone shouted from the back, one of the guards who had escorted her, his voice cracking with barely suppressed trauma. Tore them apart with her bare hands even while chained. The chains are all that keep her from murdering everyone in this room. The auctioneer's smooth expression flickered with annoyance, but he recovered quickly. Spirit? Yes, she has spirit. But that can be broken. We have provided, at no extra charge, a control collar that can be activated to deliver pain sufficient to. I'll not have that thing in my household, a Xanthian noblewoman declared, her crystalline features arranged in disgust. It's feral. It's dangerous. It's looking at me, a portly merchant whispered, his face gone pale as he met the vampire's gaze for half a heartbeat before jerking his eyes away. And she was. The vampire woman's crimson eyes were roaming the crowd with predatory interest, lingering on each face just long enough to make them flinch, cataloging weaknesses, measuring threat levels, planning escape routes, or perhaps simply deciding in which order she would kill them all when, not if, but when, the opportunity arose. Her expression was one of pure contempt. These beings in their fine clothes and their comfortable seats had never known true hunger, true desperation, true wilderness. They were prey playing at being predators, and she knew it. The auctioneer's voice took on a slight edge of desperation. Shall we start the bidding at 50,000 crown weights? Surely such a unique specimen is worth. Silence. 40,000? 30? More silence. Someone coughed nervously. Another stood to leave. This is highly irregular, the auctioneer muttered, his professional composure finally cracking. Gentle beings, please understand, if she is not sold, protocol dictates that she must be destroyed. Surely someone sees the value. Let her be destroyed, a voice called out, and several others murmured agreement. It's too dangerous. Some things shouldn't be owned. Some things should just be ended. The vampire woman's expression didn't change at these words. She had expected nothing less. Death had been her companion for longer than most of these beings had been alive. If it came now, so be it. At least she would die unchained in the way that mattered most, unbowed. The auctioneer looked to the guards, who looked to their commander, who was already reaching for the signal that would bring the executioner's team. The crowd began to relax, relieved that the uncomfortable decision was being made for them. And that was when it happened. From the middle of the crowd, not in the front rows where the wealthiest sat, but in the common section where lesser merchants and curious observers gathered, a hand rose into the air. Steady. Calm. Unhesitant. Every head turned. The auctioneer's eyes widened. The guards' hands tightened on their weapons. Even the vampire woman's predatory gaze snapped to the source of this unexpected development. The hand belonged to a human. He stood slowly, and the crowd parted slightly as all attention focused on him. He was not dressed in the finery of the nobles. No silk robes, no jewel-encrusted accessories, no floating platforms that marked high status. Instead, he wore simple traveling clothes. A long coat of dark leather worn soft by years of use, sturdy boots that had walked many roads, a simple shirt beneath, and trousers that were clean but clearly mended in places. His appearance spoke of dignity without pretense, of means without excess. He was perhaps 30 years of age, though with humans it was sometimes difficult to tell. His face was weathered in the way of those who had spent substantial time under open skies rather than within protected walls. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing features that were handsome in an understated way. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes of deep brown that held neither the coldness of cruelty nor the weakness of naivety. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, old and faded, the kind earned rather than given. But what struck observers most was his expression, calm. Not the false calm of bravado, nor the ignorant calm of one who doesn't understand danger. This was the calm of someone who had looked into the abyss, understood its nature completely, and raised his hand anyway. "I bid 100,000 crown weights," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. It was a good voice, neither too loud nor too soft, with an accent that marked him as coming from the eastern provinces, places where humans still remembered old ways and old oaths. The hall erupted into chaos. "He's mad. A human? Bidding on that? Someone stop him, it's suicide. Does he even have 100,000? The auctioneer, recovering from his shock with the practiced speed of his profession, raised his hands for silence. "The bid is 100,000 crown weights from the gentleman in the common section. Do I hear? 200,000, the human said calmly, bidding against himself. "And I can provide proof of funds immediately." This cut through the chatter like a blade. The auctioneer's expression shifted from skepticism to intense interest. "Sir, you understand what you're bidding on? This creature is—" "I understand perfectly," the human interrupted, his gaze never leaving the platform. Never leaving her. And for the first time since being dragged into the hall, the vampire woman's expression changed. The contempt remained, but something else flickered behind those crimson eyes, confusion, perhaps. Or curiosity. She had expected fear from this crowd. She had expected cruelty, greed, the desire to own her as one might own a dangerous pet. But this human's face held none of those things. His expression was complex. There was respect in it, strange as that seemed. There was determination. And beneath it all, something that might have been sorrow. Their eyes met across the expanse of the hall, crimson and brown, predator and what? Prey? He didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Didn't make warding gestures or reach for weapons. He simply stood there, meeting her gaze with the same calm he had displayed when raising his hand, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The vampire woman's eyes narrowed. Her head tilted slightly, the gesture almost bird-like in its inquisitiveness. What manner of creature was this? What human looked at death incarnate and didn't blink? Her nostrils flared slightly, she could smell him even from this distance, the scent of his blood carrying on the air currents. Human blood, unremarkable in its composition, yet, there was something else beneath it. Something old. Something that whispered of places her kind had not walked in centuries. 200,000 once, the auctioneer called, his voice taking on the ritual cadence of closing sale. Twice. No one else bid. No one else dared. The nobles looked at the human as if he had just volunteered to swim in a pool of acid. The guards exchanged glances that clearly communicated they wanted no part of what was about to happen. Sold. The gavel came down with a sound like a breaking bone. To the human gentleman for 200,000 crown weights. May the gods have mercy on your soul, sir. The human didn't smile at the macabre blessing. He simply nodded once, then began making his way toward the front of the hall to finalize the transaction. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow, no one wanting to be too close to someone who had just purchased his own death. As he approached the platform, the guards visibly tensed. The vampire woman watched his every step, her body coiled like a spring despite the chains. She could kill him in a heartbeat, chains or no chains, guards or no guards. One quick movement, one snap of those jaws, and his throat would be gone. They both knew it. Everyone knew it. The human stopped at the base of the platform, looking up at her. Up close, he could see the details the distance had obscured. The way her hands had been rubbed raw by the chains, the exhaustion lurking beneath the fury in her eyes, the slight tremor in her wings that spoke of long confinement. She was terrifying, yes, but she was also suffering. That seemed important. I need to verify funds, the auctioneer said, appearing at the human's elbow with a document slate. And you'll need to sign the ownership contracts, the liability waivers, I'll sign whatever you require, the human said quietly, pulling a crystalline card from his coat, a bank draft certified and sealed. The funds are available for immediate transfer. The auctioneer's eyes widened at the amount displayed. This is legitimate. I confess surprise, master. Aldrich, the human supplied. Aldrich Thorne. And I'll need the control collar removed before we leave. Every guard in hearing distance stiffened. The auctioneer actually took a step back. Sir, that is highly inadvisable. Protocol dictates. I don't care about protocol, Aldrich said, his tone remaining level but gaining an edge of steel. I won't own a being in a pain collar. Remove it or the sale is void. The vampire woman's eyes widened fractionally. This was unexpected. Buyers always kept the collars. The collars were the only thing that made ownership viable. Without them, creatures like her were free to. You understand, the auctioneer said slowly, that without the collar, she could kill you the moment the transaction is complete? I understand, Aldrich replied. And you still want it removed? I do. The auctioneer looked at the guards, at the vampire, then back at Aldrich. Finally, he shrugged, a gesture that clearly communicated this was no longer his problem. Very well. Your death, your choice. Guards, remove the control collar. The inhibitor chains stay until they're off the premises. Two guards approached the platform with obvious reluctance, reaching up with a specialized key to unlock the collar around the vampire woman's neck. She stood utterly still, her eyes never leaving Aldrich's face, trying to understand this puzzle he represented. The collar came free with a soft click and was quickly removed, the guards retreating immediately. Aldrich signed the documents, transferred the funds, and accepted the key to the remaining chains. The transaction, legally speaking, was complete. She belonged to him now, a sentence that sounded wrong even in the privacy of his own thoughts. She's your problem now, the auctioneer said, already moving away to close down the hall for the night. We accept no responsibility for what happens next. Guards, escort them out. The guards formed up around them, not close, never close enough to be within her reach, and began guiding them toward the exit. Aldrich pocketed the key to her chains but made no move to unlock them yet. Not here, surrounded by potential threats. The vampire woman walked behind him, her chains clinking with each step, her wings folded tight against her back to navigate the doorways. She could smell the fierce sweat of the guards, hear their elevated heartbeats, sense their fingers hovering near weapon grips. But the human, Aldrich, his heartbeat was steady. His breathing was calm. He walked as if escorting a chained vampire through a hall of terrified warriors was something he did every other Tuesday. They emerged into the night air, and the contrast was immediate. Inside had been torch smoke and fear and the accumulated stench of too many beings in one enclosed space. Outside was cool and clean, with a breeze that carried the scent of distant rain and growing things. The moon hung fat and full overhead, bathing everything in silver light that made the vampire woman's pale skin seem to glow. The guards retreated immediately, sealing the hall doors behind them with visible relief. And suddenly, it was just the two of them in the empty courtyard. A human and a monster, legally bound by a transaction that made sense to no one, least of all themselves. Aldrich turned to face her fully, and for a long moment, they simply stood there, assessing each other properly for the first time. She was taller than him by several inches, especially when her wings rose slightly, an instinctive dominance display. Her crimson eyes held 1,000 questions and even more threats. Slowly, deliberately, Aldrich reached into his coat and withdrew the key. The vampire woman's eyes tracked the movement, her body tensing. This was the moment she realized. Whatever he intended, whether cruelty or kindness, whether trap or trick, it would begin now. I'm going to unlock your chains, Aldrich said quietly. When I do, you'll be free to leave. I won't stop you. I won't pursue you. The contract I signed makes me legally responsible for you, but I have no intention of enforcing ownership. I don't believe in owning people no matter what they are. The vampire woman stared at him. This was incomprehensible. Why? The word came out rough, harsh, the first word she had spoken in weeks, and her voice was like gravel grinding against silk, beautiful and ruined at once. Because, Aldrich said simply, no one should be in chains. You wasted 200,000 crown weights for philosophy? Her tone dripped with scorn, but beneath it, confusion remained. Not wasted, he corrected gently. Invested. In doing what's right. She laughed, a short, bitter sound with no humor in it. Right? Human, there is no right here. They were going to execute me. You delayed that, nothing more. The moment these chains are off, what's to stop me from tearing out your throat and flying away into the night? Nothing, Aldrich acknowledged. That's your choice to make. She stopped, genuinely thrown. You understand I'm a vampire? You understand what that means? I understand you're a being who has been imprisoned, chained, paraded, and sold. I understand that you've been treated as a thing rather than a person. I understand that you have every reason to hate everyone in that hall, possibly including me. Possibly? She echoed, a dangerous edge in her voice. I'm hoping, Aldrich said, moving toward her slowly, the key held where she could see it, that you might see a difference between someone who buys a person to own them and someone who buys a person to free them. Pretty words, she hissed. But I've heard pretty words before. They taste like lies. Then judge me by actions instead, he replied, reaching up toward the lock on her wrist restraints. She could have struck him down in that moment. He was well within her range, his throat utterly exposed. But something stayed her hand. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the desire to understand this bizarre turn of events before she made her choice about his fate. The first lock clicked open. The chain fell away from her right wrist, landing in the dirt with a heavy thud. Her skin beneath was rubbed raw, and she felt the immediate relief as blood flow returned to normal. Aldrich moved to the left wrist, never turning his back on her. Not from fear, she realized, but from respect. Treating her like the predator she was rather than pretending she was something tame. The second lock opened. Both arms free now. She could move, could strike. Aldrich stepped back slightly and tossed her the key. She caught it on reflex, staring down at the small metal object in her palm as if it were a foreign artifact. The rest are locked in places I can't reach comfortably, he said. You'll need to do them yourself. She looked from the key to him and back again. This was a trap. It had to be. No one behaved this way. No one freed a vampire and turned their back, which he was doing now, walking a few paces away to give her space, looking up at the moon as if he had all the time in the world. With trembling hands, from rage or confusion or exhaustion she couldn't tell, she unlocked the chains around her ankles, then the heavier ones that had wrapped her torso. Each one that fell away lifted a weight both physical and spiritual. Finally she was free. Truly free. The chains lay in a pile at her feet and she stood there, unbound, powerful, free. Aldrich still had his back to her, still gazing at the moon. It would be so easy. One leap, one quick strike, and then the sky would be hers again. Why do you keep your back to me? She demanded. He turned, slowly, that same calm expression on his face. Because I trust you to make your own choice about what happens next. You don't know me. You have no reason to trust me. I know you've been hurt, Aldrich said quietly. I know you've been treated as a monster for so long that you've probably forgotten you're a person. I know that everyone in that hall feared you, but no one actually saw you. And I know, he paused, choosing his words carefully, that true monsters don't hesitate. They don't question. They just destroy. But you're standing here questioning, which means there's more to you than fangs and fury. The vampire woman's jaw tightened. You speak as if you understand me. I don't presume to understand you, he replied. I only know what I see, a being who has survived terrible things and still has the strength to stand. That's worth respecting. She was silent for a long moment, wings shifting restlessly behind her. The night wind moved through her wild hair, and for the first time in weeks she felt the sky above her, open and attainable. She could fly away. Right now. This moment. Leave this strange human behind and never think of him again. What's your name? Aldrich asked suddenly. She blinked, startled by the question. What? Your name. They called you the wild vampire woman of the northern wastes, but that's not a name. That's a title someone else gave you. What do you call yourself? No one had asked her that in, she couldn't remember how long. Guards had called her creature and it. Handlers had called her the asset. The auctioneer had called her specimen. But her actual name? Sarah, she said finally, the word feeling strange on her lips after so long without using it. I'm Sarah. Aldrich smiled, a genuine expression, small but real. Hello, Sarah. I'm Aldrich. It's good to meet you properly. Is it? She challenged. Is it really good to meet something that could kill you? We're all something that could kill each other if we're being technical, he replied with a slight shrug. Life is risk. Meeting people is risk. Especially meeting interesting people, which you certainly are. Despite herself, despite everything, Sarah felt the tiniest flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: amusement. This human was either the bravest fool she'd ever met or something else entirely, something she didn't have a category for yet. You should be terrified of me, she said, but it came out less like a threat and more like a test. Probably, Aldrich agreed amiably. But I've found that fear isn't particularly useful for making good decisions. Respect, on the other hand, that's valuable. And I respect what you are, Sarah. What you could do. But I also respect what you've endured and survived. Sarah took a step toward him, then another. Aldrich held his ground but didn't tense, didn't reach for weapons. She circled him slowly, her predator's instincts cataloging everything. The way he moved, the places he was vulnerable, the steady rhythm of his pulse visible at his neck. She could see the blood moving beneath his skin, could hear it singing through his veins, could smell its warmth and richness. She stopped in front of him, close enough now that he'd have no chance to defend himself if she struck. I haven't fed in days, she said softly, and it was true. Her captors had kept her weak deliberately. I'm starving, human. Do you know what that means? Do you understand the hunger that's clawing at my insides right now? I imagine it's painful, Aldrich said quietly. Hunger usually is. It's more than pain, she whispered, leaning closer. It's need. Absolute, consuming need. You smell like everything I want right now. One bite and I could take enough to sate myself for days. One bite and you'd barely have time to scream. Then I suppose, Aldrich said, his voice steady despite the very real threat, you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. The monster they tried to make you? Or something more? Sarah's hand shot out, faster than human eyes could follow, and gripped the front of his coat. She pulled him closer, her face inches from his neck, her breath cold against his skin. She could feel his pulse strong and steady. Not spiking with panic, but slightly elevated, so he wasn't completely without fear. He was simply choosing not to let it control him. Why do you care? She whispered against his throat. Why spend a fortune to free something that could kill you? Because, Aldrich said, and his hand, slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to stop him, rose to rest lightly on her shoulder. Not gripping, not constraining, just touching. Human contact given without fear. Because I've known imprisonment. Different from yours, but I understand the weight of chains. And because everyone deserves at least one person to see them as more than what they've been forced to become. Sarah went very still. The touch on her shoulder was so simple, so mundane, but it was the first non-violent contact she'd had in longer than she could measure. The guards had grabbed and shoved. The handlers had struck and restrained. But this was just connection. She could feel the tremor in his hand. Very slight, barely noticeable, but there. So he was afraid. He was just choosing to reach out anyway. Something cracked inside her, not breaking but perhaps thawing. Some frozen part of herself that had locked away behind walls of survival and fury and pain. She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes again, searching for the trick, the angle, the trap. But all she saw was earnestness and a kind of weary determination, as if he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had decided this was the hill he'd choose to rest on. You're an idiot, she said, but the venom had drained from her voice. I've been called worse, Aldrich replied with a faint smile. Sarah released his coat, stepping back, her wings mantling once before folding against her back. The moment of danger, if it had truly been danger, had passed. She looked up at the sky, at the moon and stars that were finally reachable again, then back at this strange human who had altered the course of her fate with a raised hand. I could still leave, she said. Right now. Fly away and never see you again. You could, he agreed. I told you you're free. That means free to make your own choices. And if I choose to stay? The words surprised her even as she spoke them. Where had that come from? Why would she even consider? Then I have a proposition, Aldrich said carefully. Not a command. Not a demand. A proposition between equals. Equals? She laughed, but it was less bitter this time. Human, we are not equals. I could snap you like kindling. Physical strength isn't the only measure of worth, he countered. But if you prefer, I have a proposition between two beings who find themselves in an unexpected situation and might benefit from cooperation. Despite herself, Sarah was intrigued. Speak. Aldrich gestured to a low wall at the edge of the courtyard. Would you sit? This may take a few minutes to explain. Sarah considered, then moved to the wall, perching on it with her wings spread slightly for balance. Aldrich sat as well, maintaining a respectful distance, and for a moment they simply existed in the quiet night, two impossibly different beings sharing space. I'm a scholar, Aldrich began. Specifically, I study the interregnum, the period 5,000 years ago when magic nearly died and the old contracts between species dissolved. There's a mystery at the heart of that period, something that's never been explained. Why did vampires retreat to the northern wastes? What were they fleeing from? And what knowledge did they take with them? Sarah's eyes narrowed. So this is about using me for information. It's about believing that you might have answers that no one else does, Aldrich clarified. Your kind lived through that period. You might carry knowledge in your blood, your memories, your history. Knowledge that could help prevent the same cataclysm from happening again. And if I don't care about cataclysms? Sarah challenged. If I just want to disappear into the night and forget this world exists? Then that's your choice, Aldrich said simply. But I don't think you want that. Oh? And what do you think I want? He was quiet for a moment, studying her in the moonlight. I think you want to understand why you were hunted. I think you want to know why your people were driven to the wastes in the first place. And I think, he paused, then continued softly, I think you're tired of being alone. The words hit harder than a physical blow. Sarah's wings flared reflexively, and her eyes flashed with anger, or perhaps pain. You know nothing about me. You're right, Aldrich acknowledged. I'm guessing. And I might be completely wrong. But I saw your face in that hall, Sarah. Everyone else saw a monster. I saw someone who had been fighting for a very long time and was exhausted from it. Sarah looked away, out over the empty courtyard and toward the dark horizon beyond. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. She wasn't tired. She was fury incarnate. She was so tired. So very tired. What exactly are you proposing? She asked finally, not looking at him. Travel with me, Aldrich said. Help me with my research. In return, I'll provide food, ethically sourced blood from willing donors or animals, your choice, shelter and protection from those who would hunt you. And more than that, I'll help you find answers about your own past. The vampires of the northern wastes have their own mysteries, don't they? Questions about why you are what you are. I have resources, connections, access to archives that most people don't even know exist. And when your research is done? Sarah asked. When you have your answers. What then? Then you leave if you want to. Or stay if you prefer. The choice remains yours. Sarah turned back to him, searching his face for deception. Why should I trust you? Because, Aldrich said, meeting her crimson gaze steadily, I gave you the key to your chains and turned my back. Because I'm offering you a choice instead of a cage. And because, he smiled slightly, what do you have to lose? If I betray you, you kill me. If I'm sincere, you gain resources and possibly answers. Either way, you're free to leave whenever you choose. It was infuriatingly logical. Sarah found herself actually considering it, which was madness. She should fly away right now. Should disappear into the night and never think about auctions or humans or strange offers again. Should return to the wild places where her kind belonged, where chains and commerce couldn't reach. But when was the last time someone had called her by her name? When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen a person instead of a threat? When was the last time she'd had a conversation instead of receiving commands or delivering death? And beneath it all, a question that had haunted her since the hunters had cornered her in the Wraithwood: why? Why had they been so desperate to capture her specifically? Why had they risked so much? The leader of the hunting party had said something before she'd killed him, something about the last one who remembers. What did that mean? Maybe this strange human with his calm eyes and his impossible offer could help her find out. 1 month, Sarah said finally. I'll travel with you for 1 month. Help with your research. If at any point I decide this arrangement isn't working, I leave. No arguments, no pursuit. Agreed, Aldrich said immediately. 1 month with freedom to leave at any time. And you'll provide blood? Fresh blood. I have contacts who provide blood for medical purposes. Some for vampiric needs specifically. It's legal in most provinces and ethical. You won't have to hunt unless you choose to. Sarah stood, her decision made. It was probably stupid. Probably a mistake. But something in her core, some part that remembered being more than a hunted animal, wanted to try. Wanted to see if this could possibly be real. Where are we going? She asked. Aldrich stood as well, relief flickering across his features though he tried to hide it. There's a archive city called Lumathara, about a week's travel east. It houses the largest collection of interregnum texts in this hemisphere. I have a research grant and living quarters there. A week's travel, Sarah mused. I could fly there in a day. You could, Aldrich agreed. But I'm unfortunately limited to horse or carriage. I'll understand if you'd prefer to meet me there. No, Sarah interrupted, surprising herself again. I'll travel with you. At human pace. She paused, then added with a slight edge of her old sharpness, someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed on the road. Humans are fragile. Aldrich's smile widened slightly. Well, I'm grateful for the protection. Shall we find lodging for the night? There's an inn about a mile from here that asks few questions and accepts unusual guests. They began walking, an odd pair in the moonlight, a human in worn travel clothes and a vampire with wings folded and bare feet making no sound on the cobblestones. The chains lay abandoned in the courtyard behind them and neither looked back. As they walked, Sarah found herself hyper-aware of everything. The sound of Aldrich's footsteps, the rhythm of his breathing, the occasional rustle when he adjusted his coat. But more than that, she was aware of the absence of chains. Of the space around her that was truly hers. Of the choice she had made, not because she was forced, not because she was commanded, but because she wanted to. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Aldrich, she said after several minutes of silence. Yes. If you betray this, if this is some elaborate trap, I won't just kill you quickly. I want you to understand that. Duly noted, he replied evenly. Good. Pause. And thank you for the chains. He glanced at her, and something soft entered his expression. Everyone deserves to be free, Sarah. Even those the world fears. They continued walking, and above them, the moon sailed through clouds like a ship through silver seas, bearing witness to an unlikely alliance born in the darkest of places. The auction hall behind them was already closing, its proprietors counting their profits and forgetting the transactions that had occurred within its walls. But one transaction would not be forgotten, not by the vampire who had been given back her name, and not by the human who had spent a fortune to do what was right instead of what was profitable. The night stretched before them, full of possibility and danger, mystery and truth. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah found herself curious about what tomorrow might bring. Perhaps there was more to this world than survival and fury after all. Perhaps there was still space for something else. Perhaps. The inn Aldrich led them to was exactly as advertised. Discreet, slightly shabby, and staffed by individuals who had clearly learned that the secret to long life in this business was not asking questions. The innkeeper, a grizzled dwarf woman with more scars than teeth, took one look at Sarah's wings, crimson eyes and general aura of danger, then simply nodded and took Aldrich's coin. 2 rooms, Aldrich specified. Adjacent if possible. Got a suite, the innkeeper grunted. 2 bedrooms shared common space. More expensive, but given your, she gestured vaguely at Sarah, Situation probably better. More private. That will be fine, Aldrich agreed. The suite was on the top floor, accessed by stairs that groaned under their weight but held. The space was simple but clean. 2 modest bedrooms separated by a common area with a table, chairs, and a fireplace that had seen better decades. Windows looked out over the town's rooftops toward the dark expanse of wilderness beyond. Sarah moved immediately to one of the windows, her predator's instincts assessing escape routes and threat vectors. From here, she could launch herself into the night in seconds if needed. Good. The room suddenly felt less like a trap. "I'll take the left bedroom," Aldrich said, setting down a traveling pack she hadn't noticed he'd been carrying. "Unless you have a preference?" Sarah shook her head, moving to the right bedroom and pushing the door open. It was sparse. A bed too small for her wingspan, a dresser, a small mirror. But it was more space than she'd had in the chains, and it had a door she could close. That mattered. When she returned to the common area, Aldrich had started a small fire in the fireplace and was pulling items from his pack. Dried food, a water skin, a book whose spine was so cracked it might have been older than him. "Are you hungry?" he asked, then paused, looking slightly embarrassed. I know you're hungry, you mentioned starving earlier. I can arrange for blood tomorrow from my contacts, but for tonight," he pulled out a sealed glass vial containing dark red liquid. "I carry emergency rations. Medical-grade human blood, preserved. It's not fresh, so it won't be as satisfying, but it's something." Sarah stared at the vial. He had come to a vampire auction, had planned to attend a vampire auction, and brought blood rations. He had been ready for this. Had intended this in some way. "You went to that auction planning to buy someone," she said slowly. "Didn't you?" Aldrich was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I've been tracking the auction circuits for months. Waiting for, I don't know exactly. Someone who needed help. Someone I could actually help. When I heard they were selling the wild vampire woman," he spread his hands, "it seemed like fate." "Fate," Sarah echoed flatly. "You believe in fate?" "I believe in responsibility," Aldrich replied. "I have resources and knowledge. When I can use them to make a difference, I should. It's not complicated." "It's insane," Sarah countered. "You could have died tonight. I could have killed you a dozen times over. But you didn't." He held out the vial. "And I'm choosing to believe that means something." Sarah took the vial, her fingers carefully avoiding contact with his. Not from fear, but from a strange sense that touching him might make this all too real. She uncorked it and drank. The blood was cold, sterile, nothing like the hot rush of feeding from a living source, but it was sustenance. Her body accepted it gratefully, strength returning in small measures. "Thank you," she said quietly, handing back the empty vial. Aldrich nodded and set about preparing his own meal. Dried meat, hard cheese, bread that looked like it could survive an apocalypse. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the fire crackling between them. "Can I ask you something?" Aldrich ventured after a while. Sarah tensed slightly but nodded. "The scars on your arms and shoulders, some of them are very old. Decades maybe. But you don't look old enough to have had them for that long. Do vampires age differently?" Sarah looked down at the marks he mentioned, jagged lines across her pale skin, silvered with time. "Vampires don't age at all once we're turned. These scars are from my human life. Before." Aldrich's eyes widened slightly. "You were human?" "All vampires were human once," Sarah said, a bitter edge entering her voice. "We're not a species. We're a curse. A transformation. Every vampire you've ever heard of started as someone's son or daughter, someone's friend or lover. And then, change." "How long ago?" Aldrich asked gently. "When were you turned?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. 347 years, she said finally. "I was 22. I had a name then too, though I barely remember it. She paused, the memories distant and faded like old parchment. "I was a scholar, actually. Ironic, isn't it? Studying ancient texts in a monastery library. We had fragments of pre-interregnum documents, things that had survived the magical collapse." "What happened?" Aldrich's voice was soft, not pushing but clearly interested. Something we translated, Sarah said, her crimson eyes distant. One of the texts. It contained a ritual we thought was historical, a record of something that had been done. We didn't realize it was instructions. When we read it aloud, she stopped, her hands clenching. It killed everyone in the room except me. Or rather, it killed everyone including me. I just didn't stay dead. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Aldrich absorbed this, processing. I'm sorry, he said. That must have been terrifying. I woke up 3 days later in a crypt, Sarah continued, the words coming easier now that she'd started. Hungry. So hungry I didn't understand it was hunger at first. Just need, burning need. I killed the gravedigger who heard me screaming. Tore out his throat before I even realized what I was doing. And then, she looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. Then I understood what I'd become. What I'd lost. But you learned to control it, Aldrich observed. The hunger. Eventually. After many mistakes. After hurting people who didn't deserve it. Sarah's voice was hollow. The northern wastes became home because that's where others like me had fled. Where we could exist without the constant temptation of prey. Where we could try to hold on to whatever humanity we had left. Is that where you've been? For 3 centuries. Most of it. Until the hunters came. Her expression darkened. They knew what they were looking for. Knew my name, my den, my patterns. They had information they shouldn't have possessed. And when they caught me, their leader said something, "You're the last one who remembers." Then he died before I could ask what he meant. Aldrich leaned forward, his scholarly interest clearly piqued. The last one who remembers what? I don't know. That's what haunts me. Sarah's wings shifted restlessly. But I think it's connected to the interregnum. To what happened to my monastery, to the ritual, to all of it. There's a pattern I can't see, a connection I'm missing. Then perhaps, Aldrich said carefully, we're meant to help each other. Your lived experience, my research. Your memories, my access to archives. Together, we might find answers that neither of us could reach alone. Sarah studied him across the firelight. He looked earnest, excited even in the way scholars did when connections started forming. But beneath that she could sense, or perhaps imagine, something else. Loneliness maybe. The kind that came from dedicating yourself to questions that most people didn't care about, from choosing knowledge over comfort. Why do you care so much? She asked. About the interregnum, about ancient history? Most humans focus on the present. Aldrich's expression grew somber. Because history repeats. The signs that preceded the interregnum, magical instabilities, breakdowns in species relations, the rise of radical factions, they're happening again. Slowly, subtly, but they're there. If we don't understand what went wrong last time, we can't prevent it from happening again. And you think you can prevent it? Sarah's tone was skeptical. One human scholar against the momentum of history? No, Aldrich admitted. But I can contribute. I can add one more voice, one more piece of understanding. Maybe that will be enough to tip the balance. Maybe not. But I have to try. Sarah saw it then, the thing that had made him raise his hand in that auction hall. He was a man who acted according to principle even when the odds were impossible. Who chose to do what was right not because he expected to win, but because not trying was unthinkable. She recognized it because before the chains and the hunting and the long years of survival she had been the same. A scholar who believed knowledge mattered. Who thought understanding could save them. We're both fools, she said, but there was no harshness in it. Chasing ghosts and old parchment. Probably, Aldrich agreed with a slight smile. But at least we're fools with a plan now. Despite everything, the trauma, the fear, the uncertainty, Sarah felt her lips curve into something that might have been a smile. Small, rusty from disuse but real. 1 month, she reminded him. 1 month, he agreed. And then your choice. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned down, each contemplating the strange alliance they'd formed. Outside, the night deepened, and the town settled into sleep. Somewhere in the darkness, the auction hall was empty, its proprietors never knowing that the transaction they'd witnessed would alter the course of events in ways far beyond their comprehension. In the suite, A vampire who had forgotten she was more than a monster slowly remembered what it felt like to have purpose beyond survival. And a human who had spent his life alone with books discovered what it meant to have a companion in truth-seeking. Neither of them knew what the coming days would bring, what dangers lurked on the road to Lumathara, what secrets waited in those ancient archives, what enemies might pursue a freed vampire and her liberator. But for tonight, in this moment, they had something rare and precious. A chance at understanding. A connection. At transforming from what they had been into what they might become. Sarah retired to her room eventually, lying on the too small bed with her wings folded awkwardly, staring at the ceiling. She could hear Aldrich moving in the adjacent room, the soft sounds of him preparing for sleep. She could fly away right now. The window was open. The night was calling. But she didn't move. For the first time in 3 centuries, she had chosen something other than survival. Had chosen curiosity over caution, possibility over isolation. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was, perhaps, the beginning of something neither of them could predict but both desperately needed. As sleep finally claimed her, that strange half-sleep of vampires, aware but resting, her last thought was of crimson eyes meeting brown across an auction hall. Of a hand raised in defiance of fear and convention. Of chains falling to the ground. Of freedom and what might be built from it. Morning came with pale light filtering through the windows and with it, a strange new reality. Sarah woke to the sound of movement in the common area, the clink of dishes, the scrape of a chair. For a moment, disoriented, she tensed for attack before memory returned. The auction. The chains. Aldrich. She rose and moved to the door, opening it carefully. Aldrich was at the table, laying out what appeared to be maps and documents, a cup of something steaming beside him. He looked up as she entered, offering a nod of greeting. "Good morning," he said. "I wasn't sure if vampires needed sleep, but I tried to be quiet in case." "We need rest," Sarah clarified, moving closer to examine the maps. "Not sleep exactly, but something similar." "What are these?" "Routes to Lumathara," Aldrich explained, pointing to various marked paths on the largest map. "The direct road is fastest but passes through 3 territories where vampire hunting is not just legal but encouraged. This northern route adds 2 days but goes through more progressive provinces. And this one," he traced a winding path, "takes nearly twice as long but is the safest." "Take the direct route," Sarah said immediately. Aldrich looked up, surprised. "But the hunters?" "Will learn that I'm not prey anymore," she finished, her eyes flashing. "I'm not hiding. Not running. If they come, they'll regret it." "Sarah," Aldrich said carefully, "I understand the impulse but unnecessary conflict." "Isn't unnecessary," she interrupted. "It's a statement. You freed me from chains but I free myself from fear. If we skulk and hide, we're telling the world I'm still something that needs to be caged. I'm done with that." Aldrich studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "The direct route then. But if we're hunted, we defend ourselves intelligently, not recklessly." "Agreed." "Agreed," Sarah said, oddly pleased that he hadn't tried to command her or dismiss her wishes. "Partnership," he'd said. "Equals." He seemed to actually mean it. "I've already arranged for supplies," Aldrich continued, "including blood rations and contacts in the towns along the way who can provide fresh sustenance. I also sent a message ahead to Lumathara, alerting them that I'll be arriving with a research partner." "A vampire research partner?" "A research partner," Aldrich corrected. "What you are is less relevant than what you can contribute. The Archive City has strict non-discrimination policies. You'll be safe there." Sarah felt that unfamiliar warmth again, being considered for what she could do rather than what she was. It was nice. Strange but nice. They prepared to leave within the hour. Aldrich shouldered his pack and acquired a sturdy walking staff from the innkeeper. Sarah needed nothing. Vampires traveled light by nature, and her only possessions were the tattered silk dress she wore and the freedom Aldrich had purchased. As they set out onto the road, the sun climbing higher in a sky scattered with clouds, Sarah found herself walking beside rather than behind or ahead, a position that implied neither submission nor dominance but companionship. It felt awkward at first, this matching of paces with someone who couldn't fly, whose speed was limited by mortal constraints. But as the miles began to pass, as they moved from cobblestone streets to dirt roads to the open highway that would carry them east, something unexpected happened. Conversation. "Tell me about the monastery," Aldrich said as they walked. "The one where you worked before. What were you studying?" And Sarah, who hadn't spoken about her human life in longer than she could measure, found herself answering. Describing the ancient building perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. The library with its precious collection of salvaged texts. Her colleagues, their names long lost, but their faces still ghostly present in memory. Aldrich listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood the context, the importance of what she'd been doing. In return, he spoke of his own journey, born to a merchant family, expected to continue the business, but drawn instead to history and mystery. The fights with his parents, the eventual compromise that let him pursue scholarship if he funded it himself. Years of travel, research, collecting fragments of truth from 1,000 sources. They were, Sarah realized, not so different. Both had chosen knowledge over comfort. Both had paid prices for that choice. Both were, in their ways, searching for the same thing: understanding. The first day passed without incident. They covered a respectable distance, and when night fell, they made camp in a clearing off the road. Aldrich built a fire while Sarah hunted. Not humans but deer, swift and clean, taking only what she needed. The blood was hot and rich, real in a way the preserved rations weren't, and she felt strength surge through her properly for the first time since capture. When she returned to camp, Aldrich had prepared his own meal and was making notes in a journal, his face intent in the firelight. "What are you writing?" Sarah asked, settling near the fire with her wings spread to catch the warmth. "Observations," Aldrich replied. "Things you've told me, connections I'm seeing. The ritual that turned you, you said it was from a pre-interregnum text." "Yes. Why?" "Because that suggests vampirism predates the interregnum. That it was known, practiced even before the magical collapse. But all the modern texts claim vampires are a post-interregnum phenomenon, a result of the magical chaos." He looked up, excitement in his eyes. "If you're proof that's wrong, it changes everything about how we understand the transformation." Sarah considered this. There were other vampires in the northern waste who claimed even older origins. Some said they'd been alive for 1,000 years. Did they remember the interregnum? The collapse itself? Some claim to. But vampire memories are strange. We remember emotions more than facts. Sensations more than specifics. The old ones would speak of the great quieting, of magic falling asleep, but the details were always vague. Aldrich scribbled notes furiously. "This is invaluable. The primary sources from that period are almost non-existent. If I could interview some of these elder vampires." "They're dead," Sarah said flatly. "The hunters killed them. That's why I'm the last one who remembers." Aldrich's pen stilled. "All of them?" "Over the past 50 years, systematically. I didn't understand it at the time, thought it was just increased hunter activity. But now I think it was targeted. Someone wanted the old memories gone." "Why?" Aldrich's mind was clearly racing. What could old vampire memories contain that would be worth systematic eradication? "That," Sarah said, "is what we need to find out." They stayed up late that night, Sarah recounting everything she could remember about the elder vampires and their fragmentary stories, while Aldrich documented it all with the careful precision of a scholar who understood he was recording something irreplaceable. When they finally slept, Sarah in her resting state, Aldrich in genuine sleep, it was with the sense that they had crossed an invisible threshold. This was no longer just an arrangement of convenience. This was a partnership with purpose. The second day brought their first test. They were halfway through a stretch of forest when Sarah's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. "Humans," she said quietly. "Armed. Ahead on the road." Aldrich tensed but didn't reach for weapons. He carried none beyond a simple knife for utility. "Bandits." "Hunters," Sarah corrected, her voice dropping to a growl. "I can smell the silver on their weapons. The blessed oil. They're prepared for vampires." "Could be coincidence," Aldrich suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Hunters patrol these roads. Could be, Sarah agreed. But I don't believe in convenient coincidences. They continued forward, alert now. The forest pressed close on either side of the road, perfect ambush terrain. Sarah's wings were half-mantled, ready for flight or fight. Aldrich's grip tightened on his walking staff. The hunters revealed themselves when Sarah and Aldrich were perfectly positioned in the kill zone. Ahead, behind, and to both sides. 6 of them, professionals by their bearing, equipped with crossbows loaded with silvered bolts, swords blessed and sharp, holy water at their belts. That's far enough, the leader called, a scarred man with the weathered look of someone who'd been doing this for decades. The vampire comes with us. You human can walk away. This isn't your fight. Aldrich stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah, a gesture that made her want to laugh and snarl at the same time. Actually, he said calmly, it is my fight. She's under my protection. Your protection? The leader laughed, genuinely amused. Boy, you don't protect vampires. You kill them. They're monsters. Abominations. The church has marked this one specifically for destruction. The church, Aldrich replied, his voice taking on an edge, doesn't govern these roads. We're breaking no laws by traveling. Let us pass. Can't do that. The leader raised his crossbow, aiming at Sarah. Nothing personal, vampire. Just doing the God's work. Sarah's muscles coiled, ready to move. She could reach him before the bolt flew, tear out his throat before the others could react. But Aldrich's hand touched her arm, a light pressure that wasn't restraint but request. Wait. You're making a mistake, Aldrich said, and something in his tone made the hunters hesitate. Not fear but authority, the kind that came from absolute certainty. This vampire is under legal protection. I have documentation of purchase from the grand auction of varieties. Attacking her is attacking my property, which is assault and theft under the Combined Provinces Treaty. The leader's crossbow wavered slightly. Property rights don't apply to monsters. They apply to legally purchased assets, Aldrich countered. I can show you the documentation. You can verify it. And if you attack anyway, you'll be the ones breaking law, not us. Is your faith worth becoming outlaws? It was a gambit and they all knew it. The hunters exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping in. Finally, the leader lowered his crossbow slightly. Show me these documents. Aldrich slowly reached into his coat and withdrew a folded parchment. The bill of sale from the auction, complete with official seals and signatures. He held it out. The leader approached cautiously, took it, examined it with the focus of a man who knew how much trouble killing someone with legal protection could bring. This is legitimate, he admitted grudgingly. But it's wrong. Vampires shouldn't be owned. They should be destroyed. Perhaps, Aldrich said quietly. But that's not your decision to make on this road at this moment. We're simply traveling. Not hunting, not threatening anyone. Just traveling. The standoff stretched, tension thick enough to cut. Sarah could feel the hunter's desire to attack anyway, law be damned. Could sense his finger tightening on the trigger. She prepared to move. Stand down, the leader ordered his team, and the collective exhale of released breath was audible. But hear me, vampire, property or not, if I hear of you killing anyone, feeding on anyone unwilling, I'll find you. Documents or no documents. Understood, Sarah said, speaking for the first time, her voice cold and sharp. And hear me, hunter, if I wanted to kill, you'd all be dead already. I'm choosing not to. Remember that. They held each other's gaze for a long, dangerous moment. Then the hunter stepped aside, creating a path. Aldrich and Sarah walked through, neither hurrying nor showing fear, until the forest swallowed them and the hunters were left behind. When they were well out of earshot, Sarah spoke. You lied. Property rights absolutely don't protect vampires under the treaty. I know, Aldrich said, a slight smile touching his lips. But they didn't know I knew that. Bureaucracy is the best weapon against zealotry. Despite herself, Sarah laughed. A real laugh startled out of her. You're more dangerous than I thought, scholar. I prefer to think of it as being creatively truthful, Aldrich replied. But thank you for not attacking. that showed tremendous restraint. "Thank you for stepping in front of me," Sarah countered. "That showed tremendous stupidity. But, appreciated." They continued walking, the adrenaline slowly fading. But something had shifted between them. Sarah had seen Aldrich risk himself without hesitation, had watched him choose to protect rather than retreat. And Aldrich had witnessed Sarah's control, her choice to trust his judgment over her instincts. Trust, fragile and new, was beginning to grow. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Travel by day, camp by night. Conversations that ranged from scholarly to personal to comfortable silence. Aldrich shared his knowledge of the lands they passed through. Sarah shared her memories of the old world, the fragments that had survived 3 centuries. They encountered more hunters, twice more, but word of the legal vampire was apparently spreading, and both times they were allowed to pass with suspicious looks but no violence. Bandits avoided them entirely. Something about a vampire with wings tended to discourage opportunistic robbery. In the quiet hours they began to know each other. Sarah learned that Aldrich had a dry sense of humor that only emerged when he was comfortable. That he was haunted by the memory of his younger sister, who had died in a magical accident he'd been unable to prevent, the real reason he studied the interregnum, hoping to prevent such tragedies. That he was lonelier than he admitted, having spent years in libraries rather than among people. Aldrich learned that Sarah could be funny when her guard was down, that she missed her human life more than she'd ever admitted to herself, that she carried guilt for every life she'd taken in those early, uncontrolled years. That beneath the fury and the fangs was someone who had once believed in beauty and knowledge and hope. They were 5 days into the journey when they reached the village of Thornhaven, a modest settlement on the border of Lumathara's province. Aldrich needed to resupply and Sarah needed fresh blood. The rations were running low. "Wait outside the village," Aldrich suggested. "Small towns can be problematic for vampires. I'll bring supplies out to you." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We've established I'm not hiding. If I can't walk into a village without causing panic, then nothing has changed from the chains." Aldrich looked troubled but nodded. "Stay close to me then. And try to look less predatory." "I can't help how I look," Sarah muttered, but she made an effort to fold her wings more compactly, to soften her expression from imminent violence to merely generally threatening. They entered Thornhaven together, and reactions were immediate. People stopped, stared, reached for children and pulled them close. Shops' doors closed. Windows shuttered. Within minutes, the local constable appeared, an older woman with iron-gray hair and a sword she clearly knew how to use. "We don't want trouble," she said without preamble, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "Neither do we," Aldrich replied, producing his documentation again. "I'm Aldrich Thorne, scholar of Lumathara. This is my research partner, Sarah. We're simply passing through and need supplies." The constable examined the papers, her expression skeptical but professional. "Research partner? A vampire?" "She has unique expertise in pre-interregnum history," Aldrich explained. "Her knowledge is invaluable to my work." "Aha." The constable looked at Sarah directly. "You fed recently?" "This morning," Sarah replied truthfully. "Dear, I have no interest in your villagers. See that it stays that way." The constable stepped aside. "You can trade but you leave before nightfall. And if anything happens, I hold you both responsible." "Fair enough," Aldrich agreed. They made their way through the village under the weight of fearful stares. It was uncomfortable, tense but also revelatory. Sarah saw how humans truly viewed her kind, not with the detached cruelty of traders or hunters, but with genuine primal fear. They saw a predator in their midst and knew, instinctively, how fragile their lives were in comparison. It should have made her feel powerful. Instead, it made her feel sad. At the general store, the proprietor, a nervous young man who couldn't have been older than 20, handled the transaction from behind the counter, unwilling to come close. Aldrich ordered supplies: food, water, skins, traveling gear. Then casually, "And do you have fresh blood available? Medical grade, properly stored?" The proprietor blinked. "We might." "For what purpose?" "For her," Aldrich said, nodding at Sarah. "She requires regular feeding." I prefer to provide it ethically rather than have her hunt. Surely that's preferable? The young man considered this, then slowly nodded. We keep some for emergencies. I can sell you a week's worth. But it's expensive. Price is not a concern, Aldrich replied. Ethics are. As the transaction was completed, Sarah noticed a small figure peeking from behind a curtain at the back of the store. A child, maybe 8 years old, with wide eyes and curiosity overcoming fear. Their gazes met, and for a moment, Sarah saw herself reflected. A monster, yes, but also just a person. Standing in a shop. Buying supplies. Doing normal things. The child waved, a tiny, hesitant gesture. Sarah, startled, found herself waving back. The child smiled. It was a small moment, barely a handful of seconds, but it cracked something inside Sarah. She wasn't just the wild vampire woman of the northern wastes. She wasn't just monster or threat or property. She was, in this moment, simply someone a child had waved at. She was a person. When they left the village, supplies packed and the sun beginning its descent toward evening, Sarah was quiet. Aldrich noticed but didn't press, giving her space to process. Finally, as they made camp that night in a meadow that overlooked the valley where Lumathara's lights were beginning to glow in the distance, Sarah spoke. That child waved at me. Aldrich looked up from starting the fire. I saw. That was nice. I've spent 300 years being feared or hated, Sarah said softly. I forgot that children sometimes see past that. See, differently. Children often see more clearly than adults, Aldrich observed. We teach them to be afraid, but their instincts are to be curious first. Sarah spread her wings, letting them catch the last light of the setting sun. Do you think, is it possible to be more than what you were made to be? To choose something different? Aldrich came to sit beside her, close but not touching. I think that's exactly what you're doing, he said gently. Every choice you make, to not kill, to travel peacefully, to seek knowledge instead of revenge, that's you choosing. You weren't made to be kind, Sarah. You were made to be a predator. But you're choosing to be more. That's what makes you real. Tears, a vampire's tears, tinged faintly red, gathered in Sarah's crimson eyes. She had thought that part of her dead, the part that could cry, could feel things beyond rage or hunger. But here it was, alive despite everything. I'm afraid, she whispered. Of hoping. Of believing this can last. I'm afraid of losing this. She gestured vaguely at him, at the camp, at the impossible situation they'd created. Whatever this is. I'm afraid too, Aldrich admitted. But I think that's good. Means it matters. And things that matter are worth being afraid for. They sat in silence as the stars emerged, two unlikely companions at the edge of a journey that was transforming them both. Tomorrow they would reach Lumathara. Tomorrow their real work would begin, diving into archives, seeking truth, racing against enemies they didn't fully understand. But tonight they had this. A meadow, a fire, and the tentative friendship of two beings learning that chains come in many forms, and freedom is something you choose again and again in 1,000 small ways. Sarah looked at the lights of Lumathara in the distance and felt something she hadn't felt in centuries, anticipation. Not for violence or survival, but for possibility. For what she might discover, what she might become. She was the wild vampire woman no longer. She was Sarah, scholar and survivor, vampire in person. And her story was just beginning. Lumathara rose from the valley like a crown of knowledge, its towers housing thousands of years of collected wisdom. They entered the city at dawn, and for the first time since the auction, Sarah felt something like hope settle in her chest. The archive city was different. Here knowledge mattered more than fear. Here, beings of all types walked openly, scholars and researchers drawn from across the world, united by their dedication to understanding. And here, a vampire with wings and crimson eyes could walk beside a human scholar and be greeted not with terror, but with curiosity. As they approached the main archive where Aldrich had his research quarters, Sarah asked one final question. What happens at the end of the month? When our agreement ends? Aldrich stopped, turning to face her fully. That depends. Have you decided what you want? Sarah looked at him, this strange, stubborn human who had changed her world with one raised hand. who had seen her as a person when everyone else saw a monster, who had given her back not just freedom but purpose. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "Not because of an agreement. Because I choose to. Because this," she gestured between them, "whatever we're building, I want to see where it goes." Aldrich's face broke into a genuine smile, warm and relieved. "Then stay. As long as you want. As an equal, a partner, a friend." "A friend?" Sarah repeated, testing the word. It had been so long since she'd had one. "Yes. I think I'd like that." They entered the archives together, ready to face whatever mysteries waited within those ancient texts. Ready to uncover the truth about the interregnum, about the vampires who had been silenced, about the forces that feared what they might discover. It wouldn't be easy. There would be dangers ahead, enemies who wanted the past buried, hunters who wouldn't respect legal protections, and the ever-present risk of Sarah's own nature reasserting itself. But they would face it together. The wild vampire woman who had stood in chains while nobles averted their eyes was gone. In her place was Sarah, scholar, survivor, and someone learning, slowly, to believe in second chances. And the human who had raised his hand when no one else dared? He had found what he'd been seeking all along, not just answers to academic questions but connection, purpose. The knowledge that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is see the person everyone else fears. Their journey had begun with an auction and a choice. Where it would lead, neither could say. But they would walk that path together, vampire and human, bound not by chains or contracts, but by something far stronger: respect, trust, and the radical belief that anyone, no matter how feared, no matter how different, deserves the chance to be free. And in the heart of the archive city, as they settled into their research with stacks of ancient texts and cups of blood wine and tea, one truth became clear. The most powerful magic is not the kind written in grimoires or bound in rituals. It is the magic of seeing someone truly, completely, and choosing to stand beside them anyway. That is the magic that changes worlds.